Bradley Show here on MyTalk 1071, streaming live and doing everything entertainment at mytalk1071.com. Colleen Lindstrom, I'm Bradley Trainer, and joining us for part 2 of our fascinating discussion with Elizabeth Ries, who was there during Making a Murder, the show on Netflix that we've all become obsessed with. This true crime 10-part series that aired in December. People are finally getting through it all. We loved having you on yesterday, but we got a lot of what about this and what about that? Because you were there as a reporter from Green Bay covering this trial.
Yeah, I worked for WBAY, which is the ABC affiliate in Green Bay, and I worked there for 3 years. So I covered the search for Teresa Halbach, everything that led up to the trial, the charges coming down, and then the actual trial. So I was there for the trial almost every day.
And I think it's important for people to know, as they're calling in with questions or emailing us questions, that you haven't watched the series. You haven't watched the Netflix documentary.
Yeah, I've only seen the first 2 episodes. I saw the first 2 episodes, and I haven't watched the rest of it. My plan, I think, I'm to the point where I'm going to binge watch it this weekend. And like I said to you yesterday, I mean, it's a difficult thing for me to relive. I mean, it was the biggest thing that I covered in my career. It was really stressful. It was, I took it very seriously. I still take it very seriously. And going back has made me a little bit uneasy. I don't know.
Well, and what's interesting is, and I want to get to these questions because we had listeners, email us, call us, write us, all these, tweet us these questions for you as somebody who was there firsthand. But I talked to a friend who was a public defender last night, and I said, have you watched this? And she's like, I deal with this every day. Yeah. Like, I'm kind of well-versed in what's going on. So it's interesting that, not only the people that were involved firsthand, but anybody I'm sure that's involved in, the criminal justice system is just like, I know! Yeah. We've been dealing with these issues for years!
The rest of the public
the rest of us are showing up.
New.
But that's kind of, I think, what makes it so sticky. Colleen, let's kick off with a question from one of our listeners for Elizabeth.
Okay, this is from Jennifer. And by the way, if you do have questions, you can email us by going to mytalk1071.com to the Colleen and Bradley show page. You can email us there. Also, we're going to have another opportunity for people to ask lots of questions about the case. Okay, so this comes from Jennifer. She says, Elizabeth, did you, meaning the press, inquire more than what is shown on the series with the state prosecutor as to why they didn't find any of the blood inside the house? Or if it was, supposed to be a bloodbath in there because of the way that she was allegedly murdered and then moved to the garage for further killing? She says it just doesn't add up at all. If she was killed on that property, there would be blood somewhere. Did you inquire about that more? Did you push them?
Is portrayed in the docuseries. Absolutely. That was at the center. I mean, that was the question all the time. Why didn't you find more? Why didn't you find this? Why was this not found until days later? Those questions were asked repeatedly during the investigation. Every time they would come out with a whole bunch of new information, those questions were asked.
So then here's my follow-up to that, because I don't think we see this in the docuseries. What was their answer to that? What was their explanation?
They didn't really have an explanation. I mean, it was, this is the evidence, this is what we have, this is what we're going with. I mean, and that's what they ended up presenting in court. I mean, when asked to speculate, why don't you have this, they would not speculate on that at the time. I mean, not that I recall. Yeah. I remember, those questions were definitely asked by the media over and over again. And those are the questions, I mean, that's the same thing that the defense is going to be asking when they're presenting their side in court.
Sure.
Okay, so again, we're asking Elizabeth Ries some questions about Making a Murder because she was there.
I was.
And Linda emailed and she said she had a couple things, but let's go through this. She says, so what does Elizabeth think the strongest evidence for and against Stephen Avery's guilt was? And then also, and I think we just kind of answered that, what was the major WTF question you had about the case that was never answered? Like, for example,
where's all the blood?
Yeah, the blood was a big thing. I mean, where is the blood and the small amount of blood that was found in certain locations? I mean, I think the biggest thing, the blood of hers that was in the back of the car, is that talked about in the docuseries?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so
very briefly, though.
It was interesting to me that the prosecution seemed to not really spend a lot of time, at least as presented in the documentary, trying to figure out, like, if he killed her there,
Right.
why would he put her body in her car and then he burns her body in his yard? Like, all of
Right.
that's with, you know what I mean? So that they don't really connect those dots.
So that was a bigger part of the case. I mean, when I was covering it, her blood being in the back of her car was a big deal. I think, you know, I've mentioned this before, that I can't look at a Toyota RAV4. I drive down 94. If I see someone driving a Toyota RAV4, I think of Teresa Hallbach.
Wow.
I think of that vehicle, and because I stared at it for so long. So I think about that all the time. Even just before Making a Murderer came out. I mean, 2 months ago, if I would see one on the street, that's what I would think of, was her. So that was a big part of the evidence. I think as far as the blood in the back of her car was a big deal at the time. I remember that being a big deal, with that they found the car, that they found the blood in the car. And then another major focus in terms of what we looked at all day, every day in court, were the bone fragments that were found burned on his property, and they showed slide after slide after slide of those bone fragments. That's what we looked at in terms of the testimony all the time. The key was a weird thing. The key was questioned. All the media was questioning the key. Well, you found the key wasn't there, and then now you're finding the key. The same thing with the bullet fragments. You searched this place, you didn't find the bullet fragment, now we're finding the bullet fragment. What's up with that? Those questions were asked over and over again too.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing she asked, and I'm curious about this, because this was the one thing to me that nobody could explain, that would indicate perhaps there was some, shenanigans going on the part of the Manitowoc Sheriff's County, or county sheriffs. Did the deputy really call in her plates 2 days before the RAV4 was found? And that was indicated in the documentary. They play a call of the detective, the investigator, the sheriff, having dispatched one of plates. 2 days before he found the car, the plate that he actually runs is the Hallbach RAV4.
And said the make, model, and color of the vehicle as well. And this is 2 days before they found it. Yeah, and that part, I don't know if
The timeline.
yeah, like the exact timeline of that from cover you. You're gonna have to ask me that again next week. Okay, when I see it, because I feel like I've seen stuff and I'm like, this is gonna drop off. It's gonna be crazy.
Well, I'm just going to tag onto what Bradley just said with this question from Melissa, who says, she says, I can't remember which case this happened in during the closing statements, whether it was the Stephen Avery case or the Brendan Dassey case, both of which are highlighted and are related to each other in Making a Murderer. But she says the prosecutor said something to the effect of, if you do not find him guilty, be prepared to say that the Manitowoc law enforcement are liars. She says, I wish I could be at home and go back to that part so that I knew word for word what he said, but it almost seemed like a threat to the jurors. Did you ever get that sense that the prosecutor was saying to the jury, if you don't find this person guilty, what you're actually saying is that the Manitowoc law enforcement is corrupt?
Well, that's because that was the defense's argument. I mean, and so that I never found that to be anything. I never thought of that as being a threatening situation. I mean, I never thought of anything that the prosecutor. I mean, you can think what you want about the special prosecutor Ken Kratz. I mean, I thought he was kind of smarmy then, and I still do now. And that was the deal. But there was never a time when I felt like he was threatening the jurors, okay?
Yeah.
And I know that that's kind of coming out today, and so what they felt like behind the scenes, that's their own situation. But I never felt like through watching any of the testimony that he was threatening the jurors. But the defense's argument was that all this evidence was planted, that this case was mishandled, and that they were trying to frame Stephen Avery. That was their claim through the whole case. And so when the special prosecutor is saying, if you find him not guilty, you're saying that the defense's argument is correct, that the police are framing this man and that they are lying. So, yeah, I think that was a fair statement for him to make in his closing arguments, because that was the argument. But that being said, I mean, and Bradley, you mentioned your friend who is, a defense attorney. The argument being made that police mishandled a case is made all the time in court cases. All the time. I mean, that's a constant thread. I mean, there are going to be, and there are a lot of criminals who will get off because of a technicality of how the police, if they didn't handle it correctly. I mean, framing is a step further than that.
What I think is so interesting about that question and how it ties into that statement that was made by the prosecutor, et cetera, is in light of what we've learned this morning about this particular juror who is coming forth anonymously and saying, I feared for my safety if I found him not guilty. I think, a lot of people are trying to pull some threads together that may or may not belong together.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I have never heard that from a juror. I mean, I think there was one juror that talked after.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, Elizabeth, because we don't see any of this. Now, we do see the one juror from Stephen Avery's case who, he was the excused juror, and then he sort of shows up and, like, hangs out outside the courtroom. He seems to befriend, some of the family members. But I'm curious what the local media at the time did after the verdict came out. Like, how do you approach, and just in general in your line of work, how do you approach juries after cases have been adjudicated?
So, I mean, it depends. I mean, I think in some cases what would happen is there would be one juror, like the foreman, who says, I'll be the one that will talk for everyone, and then everyone else doesn't have to. So, I mean, that happens. And then I don't know if there were rules about who we could talk to, if we could talk to them. I mean, it was certainly that there are very, very strict rules about where the cameras can be placed in a courtroom so that the jury is never shown. There can't even be a camera faced in that direction. I mean, if it looked like the camera was aiming towards the jury, there would be a big problem. So there was a lot of caution when it came to that. But I feel like there was one juror that talked for everybody after. And then, I mean, most of the time the juries try to kind of decompress and not
Get back to their
say
life.
anything. And then I don't know if there were other follow-up interviews. I would assume. I mean, I left Green Bay after that, and so if there were other interviews that were done with some of the jurors in the following months and the following years, I mean, there very well could have been.
Now, if you guys are just joining us, we're talking to Elizabeth Ries. We have to run to break. Do you have time to stick around?
I do, yes.
Oh, awesome.
I've already got my face on for
we've
Twin Cities Live, so don't fret.
Good. We've still got some
thank
questions
you.
for you. So we're going to continue our conversation with Elizabeth Ries on My Talk 1071, all about making